Hi, friends. In this episode on the Inner Circuit podcast, I'm joined by Alex Solo, co founder of Sprintlaw, award winning lawyer, and one of the leading voices in legal innovation. Alex isn't just a trailblazer in the legal tech space, he's also my boss, mentor, and friend. He's literally one of the nicest people I've met. I've learned so much working with him and watching how he combines strategy with genuine kindness and clarity. In this episode, we talk about the early days of building Sprintlaw to the ground up, what it really takes to scale a legal startup, fundraising as a legal tech founder, and navigating the ever changing rhythm of startup life. This one's full of real talk, insights, and thoughtful reflections on the future of law, leadership, and building something that really matters. So let's get to it. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks, Ish. Great to be here.
Thank you. Amazing. One of the interactions that I had with you when I joined Sprint Law, I think we were having one of those induction meetings and we were talking about how to deal with clients that are difficult or can get aggressive. And I remember you saying, okay, if somebody comes back to you with that, you say this and you kill them with kindness. And that's something that really stuck with me because obviously being from a law firm culture and obviously working bigger organizations and even in general people work everything's so fast these days and people work in like high stress environment and being kind is not something that gets work done right. It's just people usually approach it aggressively to get things done, but then when you said that to me, I was like, yeah, that's something refreshing. And I think that's the kind of spirit and culture that because of yourselves and Topo, we're building at Sprint Law. So it's really cool. So what inspired you to build Sprint Law? How did the idea come about?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's somewhat inspired by some of what you just shared. Tom and I had worked in a big traditional law firm, as had you, and we both know what the culture is like in those places, very traditional, very corporate, and this certain sense of status associated with being a lawyer, which implicitly causes lawyers, I think, to not provide the same level of customer care, customer experience, or client experience that you might see in other professions. We're made to feel like we're very important people, more important than the client, and they should be privileged to have our time. And in fact, the billable hour, which is the traditional way lawyers charge, encourages that mentality. The technology industry, which I have been interested in since I was in high school, and I started a small technology company when I was 19 years old. You know, was it's gone through various phases of booms over the years, and it was going through that phase back when I was going through university. Facebook was blowing up. We had these like young tech founders building very exciting companies, and one of the ethos or ideas that I took from that industry was this idea that customer experience is everything. I think there's a quote from, I think it's Jeff Bezos when he's starting Amazon, where he says, we're not a technology company, we're a customer experience company. Yes, we may use technology, but ultimately, what is it that we do that makes the customers happy? And I think applying that logic to the legal industry, you could see that no legal business was being run this way. How could you design a business that was all about making sure every single client has an amazing experience? And I think that mentality is kind of what founded Sprintlaw. We saw so many clients not having an amazing experience. We saw so many people disappointed with their engagements with lawyers, and we just thought
Yeah.
there's got to be a way to do this where put a smile on everyone's face. And so, that was that. I guess that inspiration from technology and this concept that you're talking about really was kind of the seeds of what led us to start Sprintlaw. Yeah.
Amazing. And so, was it just the mindset or the way things are done, like being kind to people and putting customer service first? So, what was the problem that you were trying to solve, and how did you
Yes.
validate that?
Yeah, well, I think, what sort of happened, Tom and I were working at this top end law firm, mainly helping large clients, but also interested in the technology industry, seeing all these different ways that technology could be used in legal practice and getting very excited. Oh, this is so inefficient. Why is everyone printing? This could be automated. Why are there all these secretaries preparing things? Why don't we use this new software? We're having all these conversations at
Yeah.
lunch as graduates, and presented some of these ideas internally, but it was clear that the law firm wasn't particularly interested. Their model is a billable hour model. So we said, hey, we'll cut your time in half to do something. They
Yeah.
said, okay, so our billables were cut. Well, why would we do that, guys? We don't want to hear these ideas. And so we were a little stuck with that, but had encountered some smaller startup businesses sort of on the other side of the negotiating table. Tomo worked in M&A, and I worked in sort of technology law, but also a little bit in tech M&A. And yeah, often there'd be startups being acquired, and you'd go through their documents and due diligence and realize these companies had never seen lawyers before and were signing terrible deals and had no idea what they're doing. And that kind of enlivened us to this idea that there's another community of businesses, smaller businesses. None of them see lawyers because it's too expensive and it's time consuming. And we got all these ideas to make it less expensive with technology. These are
Mhm.
the people that we could actually solve the problem for. These are the people that don't like the lawyers, that can't afford it. And we started to research this market segment, and we realized in Australia and the UK and many other markets, we realized that there was a huge failure of the legal system in these areas. Something like 50%. There was a study done, I think, in maybe 2015 or 2016 in the UK, which I remember reading before we started Sprintlaw. 54% of small businesses had not seen a lawyer in the last 2 years, something like that. And we just thought, wow, what a huge failure of the industry for large businesses. If you think about the universe of legal problems that they have, you know, they have probably addressed or at least thought about most of them. They'll have in-house counsel or in-house lawyers. But
Yeah.
smaller businesses, we discovered no one's on top of their legal stuff, and half of them have never seen a lawyer before. So this was really the problem that we thought, okay, we've got a really big chunky problem that
Yeah.
we can throw these ideas on how to solve it at, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, I'm also doing this other podcast where we talk about legals for startups and all. And I think every time there's a question, where can I get templates from? Because I think one is cost is something that is an issue for startups because they are not like heavily funded and they're still trying to create a product. One is cost. I think that's why people don't go to lawyers. Obviously, it's expensive, right? And the other is, I think there's no awareness or there's lack of awareness, I mean, that way. How can I use legals? Like, do I really need legals at this stage so early in my startup journey? So, yeah. And so, what are your thoughts? Like, what would your advice to be to founders just starting up and they are not aware of the kind of contracts that they need? Like, not going into the legals, but why should one see a lawyer so early in their business journey?
Yes, I mean, there's many different ways to tackle that question, and I think certainly the reason behind, as you say, this non-consumption of legal services we discovered early on and still discover today and more is that clients just don't know what they don't know. And so it seems that people have been successful in the past without having lawyers in their early stages. So sometimes you hear conventional wisdom passed down from founders. Oh, just download a template and just blah 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 blah, which is I think terrible advice. But you do hear it thrown around. I think if you're in your early stages up a business, uh, people will often think about insurance as something they should get. People understand insurance is nice and simple. If something goes wrong, I want to make sure I'm insured for that risk. Well, legal risk is another type of risk that people should be aware of. And there's many, many different kinds of legal risks. It's not just that your laptop's going to get stolen when you catch the train. It's that, your entire brand that you spend money, time investing in might be someone else's trademark. So you lose your brand name, you lose your business. It might be that you have a falling out with your business partner and the business that was going really well, there was no rule book for how that dispute should be handled. So it all fell to pieces. It might be that you help lots of customers, nothing goes wrong, but you happen to have one angry customer and they decide to take up an issue with you. And if there's no contract, that could be a business ending point or problem. And we see many stories of businesses that end up in trouble because they just didn't bother engaging with this legal stuff early on. So I think risk management is certainly one lens through which to look through. And as with anything, if you're starting a business, you've probably got a healthy risk appetite. You're probably like, I didn't start this business to invest in risk management. I started it to solve some problem.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. But I understand that as a founder. But I think what you got to work out is with your limited budget, what are you going to spend it on? And what you want to do with legal, there's a long laundry list of legal things you could do. You can
Mm.
get a trademark register, get a shareholders agreement, or you can write a workplace policy, a staff handbook.
Yeah.
Some of these things may be more important than others at your early stages. So you want to work out, what are my legal risks for my business, and what are the most important ones, and how can I at least close those off with my limited budget? And the answer differs depending on what your business is. For many
Mm.
people, it is that brand thing, at least secure your brand. For many people, it is that shareholder contract with your founders. For many people, it is that customer agreement. Those are sort of the key things I encourage people to think about early on. The other aspect, of course, we talk about risk. Lawyers are not just about risk. It's definitely an aspect of why you invest in us, but another aspect, and large businesses know this, is that lawyers can help you get a good deal. I mean, we've seen lots and lots of different deal structures before. We know how contracts can be structured. We know how to take a customer agreement. We know how to structure a late payment clause so that if someone doesn't pay you on time, maybe you can charge interest and make a bit more money. We know how to draft a scope of work if you're engaging a software developer. They're not just going to keep charging you and costing you lots of money, because if we've looked at the contract, we might put in some limits on that and some rights to get bugs rectified. So there's that aspect too. And I think there's a return on investment in investing in lawyers, which again, savvy founders realize, and less savvy ones think it's all about saving money. So, that's a couple of angles to look at it, but I think it can depend a lot on the business as to what exactly you should do. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because I think if you keep cost aside, then people would love to get legal advice, right? So, was that a challenge when you were kind of converting this idea that you had into a product? So, because traditionally, how law firms work is like you said, billable hours. That's what's the main thing, how they kind of create their revenue. So, what were your biggest challenges when you started Sprint Law with that fixed fee model?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's probably worth mentioning. There was a book that Tomo and I read by Richard Susskind called Tomorrow's Lawyers, which
Right.
anyone who's interested in, yes, yeah, I've recommended that to you before. Anyone who's interested in the industry and the trends should have a look at. But Susskind talked a lot about trends he saw. This book was written back in 2011, so there's updated versions now. But at the time, was talking a lot about how the future of legal practice would evolve from this billable hours model to more standardized and in some cases productized ways of delivering services. And the reason for that, Susskind made many comments about it, but he said was, as technology advances, we might be able to automate things more, and law may not need to be as tailored in every circumstance a case, but actually, if every business needs the same kind of thing, maybe we can slap a price on it and sell it almost like a product. And so we thought that was very interesting and potentially quite appealing to these small businesses. Law is complicated. They don't want to be charged by the hour. They want to know what they're paying for. They're used to ordering things online. They're used to paying a fixed price for insurance. But the lawyers, it seems like this complex web of costs.
Mm.
So we thought, okay, let's come up with a fixed price for every service they might need, and then it will feel like they're shopping, just like they're shopping anywhere else, except they're shopping for time with a lawyer and a service experience.
Yeah.
Great idea in theory. In practice, much easier said than done. I think for some services, we found that's very easy to do. Drafting a privacy policy for many businesses can be quite similar. And so setting a fixed price for that and delivering the same scope of work is quite easy to do. But for things like, raising capital or raising a funding round where there's term sheets and investors and negotiations involved, trying to do law as a product there is a lot more difficult, because the how long is a piece of string? Every deal's different. It's not like you're ordering the same thing again and again. So it was certainly a challenge, I think, and not necessarily a challenge that we fully solved for, I think, in the way that Sprintlaw is run today. But one thing we definitely notice, and this is an idea taken from technology, is that for small businesses, there are patterns in the types of legal needs that they have. Okay, you're running a gym, maybe you're running a IT consulting business, maybe you're an e-commerce brand selling clothes online. All three of you seem very different, but you all have customers. So you all need a customer terms and conditions. You all have brands. So you all need a trademark. You all have collect personal information. So you all need a privacy policy. So even these very different kinds of business, you could potentially design products for them that cover their needs.
Yeah.
And over time, as you learn more about these businesses, you can develop more specialized products. So, we ended up, to use one of those examples, developing a product, if you will, or I mean, a service product, depending on how you classify exactly what it is that we do,
Mm.
called Gym Terms and Conditions for gyms. And the first time we ever did that, we charged a fixed price and we got a lawyer to write out terms and conditions for a gym. But after we did that, we looked at the result and we said, okay, could this be a template for our next gym? And then we did
Mm.
another job for another gym for the same price. And we learned a little bit from that job and we added that to our template. And then we did it again and again and again and again and again. And every time we tried to capture the learnings. And what ended up happening is after we'd done about 30 of them, we actually started to have a really comprehensive um, template and series of questions and issues you might see in the gym terms and conditions. And when you do that 1,000 times, what
Mm.
actually happens is that the quality of our legal advice goes up very, very
Yeah.
high, and the
Mm.
cost to deliver it actually goes down because it's faster. And
Right.
so this productization, while challenging, if you can do it successfully, like that gym example, meant that you get this learning effect where actually we can provide the highest quality legal documentation at the lowest price for these customers, and that I think was really a pillar moment of us figuring out what our model was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So because you have background in law as well as tech, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so define background. I don't have a software engineering degree or even an IT degree, but I have kind of been a hack coder since I was 10 years old and very, very interested in technology. And then I ran this sort of app development company in my early 20s and also worked in like a tech startup company again in my early 20s. So very adjacent to the technology industry. I can almost code, but then developers actually review my work and say, this is not coding. So I can't really code, but I can at least speak to them and that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, but at least you have direction, you understand, you know what you want, right? So coming to my question, like these days, most of the products require some form of technology. So as a founder, if I'm building a digital product, right, or a tech product, what would your advice be to them, like based on your experience? Because you know tech. So if I want to start something, a product, and I have no visibility, do you suggest having a co-founder or hiring someone before starting to build a tech product? What should I know about as a founder?
It's a great question, and kind of almost counterintuitively, I may not be the best person to answer that question because I only know what it's like to know tech very well, if that makes sense. And I've seen many successful founders start who were not technical, and I've seen that combination, and we see it in our clients where you have the subject matter expert and then a CTO. And the subject matter expert kind of knows how the subject matter should work and knows the industry, and the technical expert is the tech person. In Sprintlaw, the lines have been blurred because Tom and I are both pretty technical, and we're the subject matter experts to some extent, but we're not technical enough to build the software, so we still rely on developers. I will say this: um, it's definitely possible to run either way. You can be very techie, not that techie, and there's many stories of non-techie people starting businesses. It certainly helps though to be able to speak the language of technology, to understand how technology works. And I think even if you're not a technical founder and you want to build a technology product, you want to, I'm not going to say you want to learn how to code, but you want to understand how apps are built. I think in 2025, it's gotten so much easier than it was 5 years ago to go pick up a little bit of sort of tech development skills. I mean, we have now these softwares where you can kind of go in and describe an app that you want, and it'll like on the spot make a prototype of that app. And then you can, there's coding tools now where like you don't need to know how to code. It can tell you what code to put into the software, and you can chat to ChatGPT or other LLMs and sort of yourself what you need to know. So I think doing that stuff is worthwhile. I think
Mhm.
getting a bit in the weeds of how your product's being developed with your technical person is a good idea if you're not technical. But ultimately, I don't think if you are setting up a company, there's a requirement that you know how to code. I think ultimately, if you're going to be building a technology business, you need a technical person in the business. And I'm speaking as someone that is quite technical and can almost code. But even for us at Sprintlaw, we needed to have technology people in the business to do what we're doing. So yeah, that's the best answer I can probably give to that question.
No, that's great. Obviously, it's an honest answer, and I think it'll help a lot of people who are looking to develop something because I meet people who have loads of ideas but have no clue about tech. So, yeah, no, that's great. Coming to fundraising. Okay. I feel that you are a seasoned founder who has gone through stages of investment, has dealt with investors, gets proposals for investments, right? So, based on your experience, how early or late should somebody seek investment? I mean, I do understand the fact that, okay, if you need funds in the company, you can raise capital if you're able to convince the investors, like, look, this is my MVP, or I have a prototype, that's my idea. You pitch it to them, and if they're willing to invest, yeah. But having known investors or having investors in Sprint, for example, and dealing with them, because investors also have a say in the decision making, right? So I'm coming from that. How soon do you think should a startup seek investment or
Yeah,
fundraise?
for sure. It's a great question, and in some sense, it's a personal question for the founder as well as a question of their business and their vision and mission for the business.
Mm.
So I'd say there's some businesses require capital to even exist. Like if you're doing deep technology, you want to build a spaceship or a rocket ship, literally, you want to go into space, and that's what your startup is. You need investment from day one. There's no way, unless you happen to be a billionaire, you could fund that any other way.
Yeah,
On the other hand, if you're building like a tool or a software company, it might be that you could do it with funding or you could do it yourself, and you might go faster with funding, but you might also be able to go slower and kind of do it yourself. And then there's everything in between those two scenarios I just described. And so, if your business needs funding, you better go get funding early on, I think is the answer to that question. And then you got to figure out how you're going to get funding, how you're going to pitch your business, and how you're going to sell it. And you're going to try and get the best deal that you possibly can based on the requirements. If you're in the situation where you could either do it without funding or with funding faster, again, I think this is where there is a personal aspect to it. Some people want to go hard, go quick, and build a business that they exit quite quickly, and funding can help accelerate the timeline of a business. Some people's business models are risky if they don't move first. If you think about something like Uber, it was a winner takes all market, and Uber knew that in the markets that it was in, there was not really going to be the case that there'd be 4 or 5 different ride sharing services. So they needed to go very, very quick, and so they need to raise capital. But equally, it might be possible that you're not in a winner takes all market. You don't need to move particularly quickly. Everyone wants to move fast, but you don't maybe need to move at the speed of light. And
yeah,
so, are you going to take the funding? And Sprintlaw is certainly closer to that camp where I mean, you never know. There could be some incredible piece of technology that comes around tomorrow and replaces everything. But our industry is one where we didn't feel that we needed to grow at a million miles an hour, but equally we felt that we needed capital to build some of the technology that we wanted to build, and it was going to take a while to make it back in revenue that we could afford. So if we were to just move by ourselves with no funding, it would have taken a very, very long time to generate enough profits. We might have had to run as a traditional law firm, get some profits, invest back. Like, who knows if that would have worked? Funding
yeah,
enabled us to take that leap, but a lot of the other dynamics don't apply to us. So we've kind of made the strategic decision to not raise tons and tons of capital, but to raise some capital so
mm,
far to do what we're doing. So that's one way that you might think through it. You think through your business model and what you kind of want to do. I think the thing with funding is it comes with strings that are attached, of course. The earlier that you raise funding, the more aggressive those strings are.
mm,
And I think depending on who you are and how you want to run things, I think a lot of founders don't like the strings, they like the funding. And
yeah,
so if you're in that camp, I mean, delaying it as long as you possibly can, I think is a good idea until you've got time to really know what you're doing and really have built as much of the product as you can. You can negotiate a better deal. You've got more flexibility, less pressure breathing down your neck to be creative and experiment. Oftentimes, once the venture funding comes in, they're on a strict timeline. They need you to go big or go home now. And that may not be aligned with the timeline of their fund might not be aligned with the timeline of your life, right? So it is a challenge. I also think and we've gone through this in the years of Sprintlaw, growing too quickly is very risky, and you make mistakes. You always will make mistakes. You got money and you think you should spend it. You hire too many people. Your systems and your processes get broken down over time.
Mhm.
And if you just took your time and went a little slower, you might have been able to do it in a more robust way. And I've seen, particularly as we've been through in the last, Sprintlaw's been around for 7 and a bit years now. When we started, there was that huge VC boom. Everyone was raising funding. I had a lot of friends who started at the same time as Sprintlaw. They raised huge funding rounds. They grew their teams to hundreds of people. And then the tech tumble happened in 2022.
Hmm.
And it went the other way, and it was extremely stressful for a lot of those people that had raised too much funding, couldn't
Hmm.
raise more funding. Now it seems like there's a growing consensus, particularly with AI accelerating things, that you know don't raise more so much that it breaks your business, sort of thing. And I'm definitely in that camp. So I'm finding now, Sprintlaw has less people than we did, maybe like half as many people, roughly half as many people as we did 2 years ago, and we're twice as big in terms of revenue and clients. Like, right, so like we're so much more efficient now than we were before, and part of that is leveraging technology and also just taking time to build more efficient processes. So, not nuanced question, but I think I would say if you don't really need it, take your time is the short answer.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think it's going to be a learning point for a lot of people, especially for founders, because once you get investment, I've also seen a lot of startups clients who've received tons of funding and they're hiring people left, right, and center, but they aren't growing, and in essence, they're burning money. Right. So I think being sensible and reevaluating at every stage, pre and post investment, how that money is going to be used. Because investors want to know where money is being spent, and they need to have overall control in some way or the other, whether it's in a shareholders agreement as rights or not, but they need that kind of information and that awareness of how the funds are being used. So have you had or faced a scenario where, okay, I'm asking this question because I got asked this question in a podcast recently, and that was from a legal perspective. So somebody was asking me, what are the legal considerations if you don't get along with your investor in terms of the strategic direction that you need to take for your startup? So basically, the founder wanted to go in direction one, and the investor wanted them to go in the other direction, and there was no meeting of the minds, right?
Mm.
The founder's like, what are my options if I don't have a shareholders agreement or an investment agreement? First, we were like, you must have had an investment agreement because the investor could have insisted on it, right? Because
Yes.
they need their rights, etc. So it's hard to believe that you don't have one. Yeah, but legally aside, but from a more practical perspective, have you had situations where you've had pressure from investors or deadline pressures? Like you mentioned, investors do get aggressive because it's money involved. The VC, the fund is on a deadline, etc. So what are your thoughts on managing investors, the pressure, and all of that? Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, the story you just described is almost an ad for why people need to have a shareholders agreement, because it can be very difficult to know what to do and how to approach a situation where you have a disagreement and no contract. But I think we're kind of lucky at Sprintlaw. A, being lawyers and founders means that we protected the crap out of ourselves and everyone from the beginning, if I can speak frankly about it. And I think we're very careful selecting who the investors would be and have really great relationships with all of them. Certainly, we have investors that provide strategic advice to us about what we should do. We sometimes disagree with, suggestions, but we have a good relationship where we can have robust arguments. And ultimately, the underlying acknowledgement is we're being left to run the business because there's trust in us by these investors that Tomo and I are going to be running it in a particular way. And it's really a dream setup right now. But I've seen many other businesses and clients where what you're describing happens. There's pressure from investors, and strategic differences and sometimes board seats involved. Depending on the legal dynamics, these things can go in very different directions. I mean, if the investor has strong rights in the business, then they can kick out founders or replace them. And I've sadly seen stories where that's happened and it's caused issues for the business. On the other hand, if the founders have strong rights, they can sort of say, they got the power to say to the investor, I understand what you're saying, but it's our call and we're going to do this. So too bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And now I'm of the camp in negotiations in general with any person, whether it's an antagonistic, party or a friendly party. Um, it's often much simpler in business to try and come to a constructive resolution. Clearly, someone's got a point somewhere if they feel very strongly about something. And this is the same thing you said at the beginning of this chat that we're having about angry customers. I believe you can turn any one of them around to a happy customer. An angry
Yes.
investor, it may be the same thing. You know, you can understand what it is they're saying. They might be trying to say something that's legitimate, and there's a way to persuade them. Maybe you're going to still disagree, but
Mhm.
that this business needs to move forward, and
Yes.
the decision that's being made is this for this reason. Most investors, I find, unless they're really antagonistic investors, want the business to succeed. And for the business to succeed, they're highly reliant on the founders of that business loving what they're doing and being invested in what they're doing. And if the founders really feel strongly about something, most investors should eventually see reason and say, okay, well, even though I think you're going down the wrong track, I have to let you go down this wrong track because you're the founder of this business. So it can be a complicated. It gets very interpersonal and so on. And I do think that the legal stuff provides a subtle bedrock for how those conversations take place. They are very practical conversations, but ultimately the subtle power dynamic in terms of who has final say
Yeah.
directs how people speak to each other, which is why it's so important to get that stuff sorted early on. It really makes those practical discussions a lot easier.
Yeah. I'd engage Sprintlaw.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. And what do you think about mentorship? How important do you think that is for somebody who's a founder?
I think it is absolutely critical. And I have to say, in the first few years of Sprintlaw, we had advisors, friends, people that we went to who I now in retrospect, I guess you call them more mentors. But at the time, I heard a lot of founders talk about having formal mentors or like business coaches or whatever it is. And everyone's saying, "Oh, it's so amazing! It's so amazing!" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, is it so amazing? Like, what do they do?" But I think everyone's in a different situation when they found a company and with varying levels of experience. But certainly for Tomo and I, where we were young founders, we started Sprintlaw when we were 27. We had ideas about technology. I'd run a small business before, but
Mm.
did we know how to like raise a ton of capital, build a global team, introduce culture incentives, manage complicated conversations, hedge competition? There's a lot of things, and you can research stuff online, but ultimately there's value to wisdom. And I think founders need to have the humility to listen to people. Often founders have giant egos, but even with the giant egos, and I've seen this in other founders with giant egos, the ones that are successful have giant egos, but somehow put them aside to listen to people when it comes to business. So I think it is possible to have both, but it can
Mm.
get in the way. But I think being able to listen to people and learn from wisdom is crucial, and has certainly been, we've had a group of largely informal or semi-formal mentors helping us out at Sprintlaw. A lot of them have ended up being investors. Some are not. Some
Mm.
are marketing gurus. Some are people and culture gurus. Some are former executives, former founders. They each have different things that we go to them for, and we have certainly um, one mentor in particular that we have regular sessions with, and all of these people have helped us navigate all of these problems. And what I personally find really useful is bringing to them problems I'm struggling with, problems I'm unsure about, and just spitballing them with them. And oftentimes you're not the first person to have had this problem, and they
Mm.
may have seen an analogous issue,
Mm.
and they'll just say, "Oh yeah, I know that one. Just try A, B, or C." Something you've been mulling over as if it had never been solved before for hours. So I think I've found it really, really rewarding. And then again, confidence. You get the confidence from mentors to know whether you're doing a good job, whether you're on the right track, or whether you're a complete idiot. And I mean, if you are being a complete idiot, it's useful to know that as well. So I think it's really, really, really helpful. So yeah, big fan of the whole mentoring thing. I don't think it has to be formal. I think it could be informal, but it really does help pass wisdom around.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I think mentors in any profession are useful because they've had the experience, they are wiser, and they've led the road already. So, yeah, it didn't come out properly. I'll cut that out.
Oh, good. No, I think you made a good point there. That's good.
Okay. So, yeah, like you said, you started as a founder in Sprint when you were 27. Now, what's been the driving force There must have been times where things weren't working out, where, say, sales were slow, where systems weren't working, where things were not going as planned, right? So, how do you keep that will to continue going? How do you deal with, say, a situation that needs resolution, but it's getting difficult? How do you try and stay on track?
I think there's, I guess, two layers to that answer. One is like, what's driving you to keep doing it when days are very stressful and you just want to throw up your hands and walk away from the whole thing? And then, in general, how do you approach these problems in practice that are insurmountable? Both of which are important questions when you're running a
Have been
company.
days like that? Have there been
Sorry.
days?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think, but on the first point, in terms of wanting to throw in the towel, like, I mean, I've certainly felt like from day one, or maybe not day one, but maybe 6 months in, when it started to feel like we were really running a company, we're kind of all in on this, and it just has to work. There's this mentality of like, no, it just has to work. And then you start to feel more and more that way as you grow. You build a team, and then there's the responsibility of people's livelihoods and salaries and families all on the line on your shoulders. And more you're like, it just has to work. We just have to make this work, and we have to make it. And so I think that mentality of there's got to be a way we can do this, but also the confidence that you get from mentors and others that we can do this. We have the skills to do this. We're not hopeless. I think that's kind of an underlying energy that gets you through the tough situations. There's always a way through this. It can be solved, and you might have to work extremely hard, but it's doable. And so there's a certain determination. And I think, I don't know whether that's a requirement for being a founder or not. Again, I don't think there's ever one way to do things. I think some people run small businesses that don't necessarily want to scale and do something super ambitious like we're trying to do at Sprintlaw. So maybe the dynamics are different, but certainly in what we're trying to do, build a very fast growing startup oriented tech business, you're taking a big risk, and you have to believe that it's going to work. So I think we have that energy, and certainly it helps having a co-founder who you can spitball ideas with and balance each other out when things are appearing stressful. And then in terms of the actual problems, there's so many novel problems which you don't realize when you're so excited about solving the problem for like the small businesses where legal's so expensive and complicated, and you have all these amazing ideas with technology. But then actually, we need to build HR processes and recruitment processes and team events, and we need to set targets for our sales team. We need to work out how marketing works, and we need to understand like our security and risk and all these other things. That's actually what goes into building the business, and all that stuff you never thought about before. But I think, again, knowing that there's solutions to all those problems somewhere, you just got to find them, has been the other aspect. And you just got to find the right person, speak to the right person, and ask them the right question. And that's when I think the founders become quite humble, because it doesn't matter who you are, chances are you don't know everything about everything. So you almost have to become a student of others, and that's kind of how you get through those seemingly unsolvable problems, I think.
Amazing. That is humbling, like to think that you're actually doing your job at the end of the day, right? So that you can run this company, you can look after your employees and their families, and you can build something that nobody has ever seen, basically. But yeah, I wanted to ask you this question. Do you think entrepreneurship is for everyone? Is everyone, do they have that entrepreneur in them? I think no, because it requires a certain skill set plus a certain attitude to be a founder, right? Like you said, there will be so many issues when you're running multiple verticals in an organization like marketing, technology, HR, everything. And it's obviously a risk running a business. Like when you said, if you want to run a small business, cool, but if you want to run something ambitious and you want to scale it, and I think scaling is also quite daunting. So, yeah, what's your thought on, like, do you believe, what kind of mindset should one have if they want to jump into entrepreneurship and build a startup?
Yeah, it's a amazing question, and one that I don't know that I I'm still evolving my answer to that question, because certainly, like, I remember being younger before I started Sprintlaw, speaking to people, because everyone has ideas about a business. Everyone's, oh, what about this? What about that? I got this great idea, and I remember being like, well, just go do it. Here's what you do. Why don't you just go do it? And kind of not understanding why people wouldn't just be an entrepreneur if they had a great idea. And now I share closer to what I think your view is, which is it really it's a lot. It's not for everyone. And again, I think there is a spectrum of different types of businesses, which there's not one type of person that is the founder personality type. And again, for certain businesses, you may not be able to run business A, but you could run business B very well. So you may be only a good founder for X,
Mm,
but also I think it may be the case that founding anything at all may not suit your personality type. And I think what are the traits? I don't know if I can fully pinpoint them. I think I touched on some of them earlier. This a determination aspect to make something work, to be able to build something from scratch, a comfort with ambiguity, and really a lot of people like to come to work and they've got a task and they'll complete it. And that's like the direct opposite. That doesn't really matter what any kind of business you're running is. That's close to the direct opposite of what it is to run a business because you got to come up with the task list and then
mm,
question whether the task list is actually the task list. And then you got to complete the task list and accept that you probably wasted half your time on that task list. So if you're a person that likes to be given the task list, it can be very challenging to adopt
mm,
the mindset. And then again, I think like stress tolerance and the flexibility and understanding that it's nearly impossible to predict what the next 6 to 12 months will look like at any one time when you're running a business. And if
mm.
that is stressful for you or something that you can't deal with very well, then it might not be for you, sort of thing. So, but I think, yeah, I haven't probably reflected enough to know exactly what I think the traits are. That probably gives you a flavor for some of the aspects of it, but it's a tough one. And again, I've encountered so many different kinds of founder that were successful that I think it is really, really hard if someone's asking themselves, should I start a business? I think it is really hard to know whether you are the right personality type or not. And I would maybe argue that if you're seriously thinking about it and you're thinking of taking the leap, you probably have the bug a little bit that you probably could do it. I think a
Mm.
lot of people who wouldn't suit as founders are just not even thinking about it, right? So there is probably a bit of like a chicken and the egg. If you're thinking of doing it, maybe you have the personality for it.
Yeah,
But if you never think about it, you never daydream about it, you're probably not. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can pinpoint qualities in you that I think like a founder should have. Like obviously one is consistency, one is thinking out of the box to solve something, right? Because there'll be issues. I've seen you work and you have to think out of the box. You have to be quick, you have to be prompt, you can't be sitting on things. And yeah, I think you need a vision because I remember, and I don't know if I should say this, I can edit it later, but I think your vision for Sprintlaw is that it should undergo an IPO. It should be the first law firm or legal consultancy to undergo an IPO. You have that vision. So I think those are the traits that a founder should have.
And that's fine to include. I mean, yeah, I might respond to that, but no, you're right. And again, I think certainly one of the visions we have for Sprintlaw, and when we close our eyes and imagine where it could be, and sort of where it could go, is being large scale. And certainly one thing we've thought about is, could we be one of the first legal businesses to be listed? Certainly one that's doing small business law, and I think that those big visions for your business when you're a tiny little company, but thinking about how are we going to be a unicorn, how are we going to be a billion-dollar company, I
Yeah.
think particularly if we're talking about the traits for building a scaling business, I think you need to have the big vision. And it's what's been helpful for me from the mentors is the confidence around it can seem so far away that you get to the day when you're doing your billion-dollar listing or whatever it is. But when you speak to people that have actually done it, they've actually been there, and some of them are people I'm lucky enough to have as mentors or advisors, or even just to have had meetings with them. The
Mm.
consistent message I get is it seems far away, but you just get there bit by bit. First you're here, then you're there, 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 and then suddenly you find yourself doing the big $1 billion moment. And I think certainly we've been relatively successful, but we've still got a long way to go in terms of where we want to be. It's if you asked me at the beginning what would it be like to be at the size that we're at now, I would have been
Mm.
like, oh, we'd be so successful. I'd be so happy with that. I have no idea what it would look like. And we kind of got here without even necessarily realizing. A day passed, a week passed. We kept getting a little better at kind of everything. We navigated some challenges and here we are. So I think the vision is necessary. The belief in being able to do it is necessary. And the reality is just climbing the mountain. I mean, some companies climb the mountain super quick. I've seen a couple of particularly AI companies in the last 6 months just go from zero to like unicorn in 3 months. So you kind of go, well, wow.
I guess
But
the service is different, right? Like where we are at, I mean, gradually progressing works great for us as compared to like just shooting up steeply, because I think we have the ability to sustain where we're at. Right. So we're not going to collapse. If we just shot up, without having the necessary backing, then it would be catastrophic, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I think like you need to understand what your business is and how you work and how you can scale. And one of the always elegant things about those like B2B SaaS software companies is, or even B2C SaaS software companies, why venture capital firms love them is that often they'd have a software and there was no difference between 1,000 users and 10 million users. They just shoot up really quick. Or at least they thought there's no difference. What they found out over time was that there's a huge difference, and a lot of them collapsed when that happened. But on paper, there was less
Yeah.
of a difference. But certainly, one of the things we've seen consistently at Sprintlaw is if you grow too quickly without being ready, man, it can be really painful. So,
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I read a LinkedIn post once. I think it was a founder, and he was undergoing stress and he was being suicidal. Sorry, I'm just bringing this up. But then I had a lot of friends who are undergoing stress and anxiety, and they're not necessarily founders, like they work in law firms and other organizations. And that's why I wanted to kind of help them figure it out. Not that I have it all figured out, but then because I have always been interested in yoga and I understand how important yoga can be to train your mind. So which is why I wrote this book, The Inner Circuit. Basically, it's a modern take on Ashtanga yoga. It's a form of yoga. And as you know, yoga dates back thousands of years, right? So it started with a sage called Patanjali, and he wrote like something called the Yoga Sutras, which is like sentences, and about 195 or 196 Yoga Sutras. And this book that I've written is just about one, the first Yoga Sutra. And it says Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodh, which means how yoga can help you control the fluctuations of your mind. Right. So it's quite like deep in that sense, but bringing that knowledge into today's world, I think is so relevant, especially for founders and people in high stress jobs, as well as Gen Z, which I feel like, and even the generations under the younger people, I think instant gratification is something people want these days. They want results quick. They don't have the patience. They're not resilient enough to see results. And I think being a founder, you need all those things. You need to be consistent, you need to be resilient, you need to persevere, and you need to be smart to reach your envisioned goal.
absolutely. And I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, Ish, but you'll have to give me a copy when I'm over in the UK
I
soon.
will.
But
I will. Yeah, 100%.
yeah, but I think a
Edu,
lot of, sorry.
Edu got a copy last night, so he'll
Love
read.
it. Well, I'll give it a read, and I think some of what you just shared resonates. And I think for I have a lot of founder friends, and obviously I'm a founder myself. It is a super high stress job, and it's not
Yeah.
the only high stress job out there. And then some people can handle that better than others, but for pretty much everyone, the stress takes its toll. It's
Mm,
certainly difficult to be present sometimes. You can never really stop working, and you're with family or with friends, and you're still thinking about work problems all the time.
mm,
And I think there are things that you can do, and I know yoga is one of them, meditation is another, which can really help take your mind off a lot of what's going on, or help you just kind of sort of relax in a way where you're not
yeah.
so curled up all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
and uh, you know,
How do you deal with the stresses? You working constantly, you have a family, you have a little one to look after. How do you kind of manage all these negative effects of being a founder?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is high stress. I think I have a fairly high stress tolerance, which does help, and I think I also enjoy a lot of what I do, which makes work not as stressful as it might otherwise be. And in a way, some of the work I did before working at the large law firm, the hours, in a sense, may not have been much different to what I'm doing now, but the hours were spent doing things I really didn't like, and I found it a lot more stressful. So there's an aspect of freedom that you get. And again, I wouldn't say that I've perfectly handled. I'm a shining example of how to live a healthy and balanced life and be a founder. I'm still working on that, and certainly having a child has presented its own new set of challenges in balancing everything. I try and increasingly eat well, exercise. I play a lot of music that helps me be present. I try not to work on weekends. I've turned off notifications on my phone, so when I'm not working, I have to go click a button to check them. So a lot of little things like that that help me compartmentalize stuff. Those are some strategies, but you got to evolve the strategies over time as you change and your lifestyle changes, I find. And I'm sure there's more I could be doing.
Brilliant. Excellent. Like, I can totally resonate with you being a mom, working full time, not full time, part time, and then trying to do this on the side as well, because I feel it's much needed and I want to kind of help people. What's your take on having a co founder and how do you make that relationship work?
Yeah, it's interesting again because you hear a lot of stories of co-founder relationships breaking down, breaking up, and I think for whatever reason we've been lucky at Sprintlaw. Tomo and I are very, very close friends. We're close friends before we started the business, and I think that fact has helped us through the business. There's a deep trust with each other because we kind of know that we care a lot about the business. Our relationship is, in a sense, more important than the business. And so it guides our decisions. And I think that trust kind of helps us work together and you often see founders suspicious of each other or issues emerging as the money gets involved. We just have never had any of that stuff. I think also like our visions, our goals, our lifestyles are very similar in terms of what we want. They're not identical. If no one's ever is, but we're pretty aligned in that sense. And I think as decisions need to be made as the business goes on and on, how much investment are we going to raise, how much stress are we going to undertake, what kind of culture are we going to build for our team. You can see, you can imagine. Luckily, it hasn't happened to us, people who are really close and have a similar vision at the beginning over time will diverge on all these little questions. And that's where the divergences can happen. And I think for us, that hasn't happened because I think we share so many of those core traits. We're ultimately, we're different people, but we have a lot of similarities. And that's really helped, I think, along the way. I think we also realized fairly early on, this was kind of a process in the first couple of years of the business, what our relative strengths are,
Yeah.
and what to turn to each other for, and kind
Mm.
of divided up the work that we do and the decisions that we make and the way that we consult with each other based on understanding our relative strengths. And I think, again, I tried to found a business before Sprintlaw with another friend of mine who is brilliant but extremely similar to me. And we would be discussing what we do in the business. It was so easy to work with him, but
Mm.
ultimately, either of us could have done each task, and we weren't actually bringing that much value to each other, if that makes sense. And I think too much of an overlapping Venn diagram with your founder, I think, is also a problem because you start to think, oh, I could do their job better than them or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whereas with Tomo, one of the reasons that I think we set up well as co-founders was I remember sort of meeting him and thinking, this guy is so incredibly smart in a way that I'm not. Like the way he thinks is so different to me. And
Mm.
so respecting that aspect and wanting to bring that in, I think has been a real boon in the way that we've collaborated. Because again, over time, he frequently will make points I haven't thought of or bring a perspective that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably the same vice versa. So those are some of the aspects to it. But I think in a sense we've built our relationship and maintained it over time. And I sadly have seen many relationships not go well and not break down. I guess we're cognizant of that ourselves, and so we work a lot to maintain it.
Yeah. Well, I think when personalities complement each other, and like you said, there's a huge element of trust and mutual likes and dislikes and mutual direction and vision. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I want to ask you a follow up question because I think I've got my answer. And it was more generally, I wanted to know what's your thought on bringing in a co founder. But because your dynamic with Tomo is so like personal, so I think I'll leave that follow up.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd have much to say about that for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And if you could go back and change one thing in your journey, Sprintlaw journey, what would that be?
It's hard to say because like the mistakes we've made have led to the insights later on of how we should do things. I think we made some of the classic mistakes of just like trying to grow too quickly and raising investment to keep up that fast growth when we could have gone slower and more efficiently at times. And I think back to sort of chasing like really fast growth in an inefficient way. That was probably the kind of captures the theme of some mistakes that we probably have made in the Sprintlaw journey. That said, we didn't know what the limits of our model were. We didn't know we had to test what would happen if we tried to do this. Oh, okay, we can't go like that. We got to change things. So it's really hard to say with the regrets thing. There's only ever been one journey that you go on, both in business and in life, and so uh, you only really learn from what happened, and that leads to the good things later on. So that's something that we think about a lot is like let's not be stupid and crazy, but do this sensibly and
Yeah.
sustainably. And
Yeah.
that's a dynamic that we now have in the way that we run Sprintlaw, which we probably had less of early on. We were probably like, we got to get there right now. We got to go really, really quick. Take a breath, slow down, and kind of just do it right. I think is probably the main theme of things. If I was going to go back and change anything, but otherwise, I have to say, at least in the Sprintlaw journey, it's been pretty awesome. I've loved it pretty much the whole way, even though there's been stressful times. So wouldn't change a thing, really.
That's excellent. Okay, and finally, for listeners who want to kind of build something of their own, what's that one small but powerful habit that's helped you stay on track?
I read this another book called Getting Things Done. I can't remember who it's by, but if you Google it, it's there's a whole basic almost like a cult of people that follow this book. Ironically, I don't think I read the whole book, so I didn't actually get it done. But the first half was very illuminating of this book, and a lot of one of the lessons in there, which is has been kind of life changing in the way that my productivity is this idea. He's like he talks a lot in the book about divide up all the things you need to do into things that can be done, need to be done now, need to be done in the next week, need to be done later, and that you want to do someday. And put everything you need to do in kind of 4 lists. And then he has this other principle, and this is the game changing one. Anything that can be done in under, he says 2 minutes, but I make it 5 minutes. Anything that can be done in under 2 minutes, just do it now. Why are you thinking about it? Just get it done. It's cluttering space in your brain. You're spending
Yeah.
more time thinking about it than doing it. Just do it immediately. The second you think about it, if it's under 2 minutes, it should just be gone. And I think like that one little rule, I definitely run my life that way. I have very little clutter because a lot of those little tasks are gone.
Yes,
Everything else is somewhere on a to do list. And the fact that I'm using lists in a way and this system as an external brain means that my actual brain is quite free for creative thinking. I can think all the time about ideas and things that I want to do, knowing that there's not, I'm not sitting there going, oh, I got to remember to do this, I got to remember to do that. That's not a thing that goes through my mind. So I think that aspect and way of organizing one's life is quite powerful, and there's many different ways to achieve it. But certainly, I learned it from that book. Yeah,
excellent. I'll try that for sure.
yeah, it's good.
Putting up, okay, I'll send that email in a minute. I'll send that, I'll go do that. Yeah, for sure. I'll try that too. I'm sure it's going to be effective. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Alex. I am honored. I had a great time. What are your thoughts?
That was fun. Thank you so much, Ish. Great questions, great chat, and hopefully some useful insights.
Oh, thank you. And can you do me a favor and tell the audience to like and subscribe to this channel?
Everybody, you've got to
Done.
like and subscribe to this channel now. It is a requirement.
Oh, amazing. I'm going to stop the recording.